As part of the herpetology team at the Natural Resources Institute, her research focuses on understanding the natural history of reptiles and amphibians, including population dynamics, habitat associations, and other ecological information to help the conservation of herpetofauna in Texas and beyond. Danielle, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today, and let me turn things over to you.
Thanks. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
I can hear you great, and I can see your screen.
Perfect, thanks. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for attending. I'm excited to share some of the long-term and most recent research we've been doing on the Louisiana pinesnake. I went ahead and put my email address at the beginning and end of this PowerPoint. In case you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. I always love to talk more about our research. Just to start off, acknowledgements. Our research couldn't be done without a whole bunch of people. First of all, the main portion of the research I'll be talking about today was funded through TPWD Section 6 funding. We have a lot of help with Dr. Paul Crump, who you just heard. And then we've also been working very closely with the Forest Service, Josh Pierce and James Childress, who have been running the Louisiana Pinesnake stuff long-term. Land access to do our trapping from private landowners, which we're very grateful for. And then a big team of NRI staffers. So my co-PIs, Wade Ryberg and Toby Hibbets. Got some research associates who go through millions and millions of images for us. Corey, Katie, and John. And then additional NRI co-workers who have helped with the change detection algorithm I've been talking about today. So with that, I'll jump in. So first of all, some snakes are very easy to find. They may show up where you don't want them. They may show up in your house. They may knock on your front door, or, on the rare occasion, they may pop up in some unexpected places. Unfortunately, most of the snakes that we study do not do this. When you're trying to study populations, you're out trying to look for more than these one-off observations. We're trying to track large numbers of individuals, ideally over time. And so studying snakes in the wild has a lot of challenges. So believe it or not, there are snakes in these images, and I'll give you a minute to look for them before I show you where they are. But snakes present a lot of challenges. They can be very cryptic. They are well camouflaged. They may be active only some parts of the year or some parts of the day. They may have very wide or very narrow niches that make it challenging. You kind of have to get them where they are and be able to work hard to find them. And then a lot of snakes are fossorial or semi-fossorial, so they spend a lot of time underground and aren't always available for detection. So did y'all find the snakes? It always takes me a minute, even when they're circles. So here they are sitting. And so there's a lot of ways we can go out and find snakes. So visual encounter surveys, where you're walking around areas and hoping that the snake is moving around in the same area and you're able to detect it. We also have things like drift fences and traps in the picture in the upper left. Or some snakes do really well with cover boards. So you put these boards out, let them sit for a while and go check them. And amphibians, reptiles, and other things will use them as shelter. And so you can find animals from check to check. However, these all require a lot of manpower. And if you're searching for rare species over a large area, you may not always have the time to invest in that. And so we've turned to automated detection in some ways, shapes, and forms. And specifically today, we'll be talking about camera trapping. And so you can see in the picture on the left there, we're getting rid of an old trap and putting in a camera trap. And that camera trap is basically just a game camera that is mounted in some way. For snakes, we have them facing horizontal to the ground, so they're looking down over the area. We keep the drift fences in place. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's basically a plus-shaped drift fence there to help direct snakes, hopefully, towards your movement where you're going to capture those. And so camera traps have been used for a long time, and they have been very successful with things like large mammals, small mammals, They do fairly well with birds, but there are, again, more unique challenges that are that occur because of the nature of snakes. And one is that snakes are ectotherms, right? So they tend to match the temperature of the background of the stuff they are moving through. And so a lot of camera traps are used on infrared settings where the camera is set to detect a temperature difference between the surface area of something moving through the picture and the background surface area. And that doesn't always necessarily work well with snakes. And so we've used camera traps on a timed setting. But to go back way, way in the past, 10 or so years ago, the Louisiana Pinesnake, Pituophis ruthveni, is one of the first snakes we started working with camera traps on. So here's a picture here by Toby Hibbets. And they are a large colubrid snake. They look very similar to their congeners. You may know gopher snakes or bull snakes, very similar. They are found in East Texas and Southwest Louisiana. And so this is a most recent map from the 2018 threatened listing decision. But they prefer sandy, well-drained soils in longleaf pine forests with open canopies, and they co-occur with the Baird's pocket gopher, which benefits the snake in two ways. The pocket gophers are a primary prey item, and they also create a burrow system that the pine snakes use to both overnight and to overwinter. Pine snakes are active spring, summer, and fall, most typically active March through May and September through November. And then some radio tracking in Texas showed that pine snakes are semi-fossorial, so they're spending a lot of time underground, primarily diurnal, they're moving during the day, and despite their size, they're moving relatively small distances. They were listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act in 2018, and the primary risks to them were due to loss, degradation, and habitat fragmentation for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of growth in East Texas and Louisiana. And secondary to that, they also face threats from things associated with small population sizes, like genetic bottlenecks. And so the Louisiana pine snake has been monitored in Texas for many, many years. And traditionally, we've done that with these traps. And so the traps are set. They're open for a set number of days. People are going out every day or every other day to check these traps and set anything that gets caught in them free. And these are very useful, very helpful, but sometimes they can be time intensive, monitoring intensive, and they can be bureaucratically intensive because we have to maintain proper animal use protocols, which can be challenging. And so we've set out for many reasons to see how well camera traps work in addition to these hands-on monitoring techniques. And so our very first pilot study occurred in 2016, so a while ago, where basically we wanted to see, are our camera traps as effective as box traps? And so we deployed 26 camera traps and 58 box traps in East Texas. They were run March through October of 2016. And we do our time-lapse trigger, so we're not playing around with the infrared settings right now, but a time-lapse trigger where an image is taken every 30 seconds, and we do that during the day from 5 to 10 p.m. From 5 a.m. to 10 p.m., sorry. And so we had a couple papers come out from that first pilot study. The first one, Adams et al., 2017, comparing cost. So are these a cost-efficient manner? And you can see there, the green line shows that cameras are as effective as or cost-efficient as trapping when you're checking every third day, and way more cost-efficient when you have to check traps daily. And camera traps have a larger startup fee, but they become more cost-efficient the longer you use them. And then this Newhart et al. Study in 2020 came out, and basically we wanted to know, were we capturing as many snakes on the cameras as we were in box traps? And so you can see our initial study, we had 8.3 million images on the cameras and a total of 18 species detected. Box traps ran for almost 12,000 trap days and had 15 species detected. We had a higher detection rate on cameras, and you can see on the plots to the left, for most large snakes, the camera trap, the dotted lines, had higher detections than our box traps, but not for all of them, and some were very similar. So we basically concluded that camera traps are at least as effective as box traps and may capture more species because they're able to run longer and may not have that trap avoidance that some species have. However, during the study, no Louisiana pine snakes were detected. So we wanted to be extra sure that the study or that this trapping technique works well with pine snakes specifically. And so we moved on to a next pilot study at the Louisiana Pinesnake reintroduction site in the Kisatchie National Forest in Louisiana, where we paired cameras on the left with automated pit tag readers on the right. So all the snakes that are bred and released into this reintroduction site have pit tags, and we have the drift fences set up with pit tag readers. So when a snake crosses it, it's logged, and we know which individual crossed that. We also have we paired 5 cameras with tag readers, ran those cameras from March to October 2019 with the same settings as before. But this time we knew that we were getting millions and millions of images on the back end, and we needed to somehow control that. And so we have been working on attempting to get a better computer algorithm, basically something that will go through the images before us and cut down on the number of images, hopefully getting rid of empty images and keeping images that have snakes or something else in them. And so for this second pilot study in Louisiana, we want to evaluate how well this change detection algorithm, and I'll dive more into that later, but how well this algorithm was working. And so we had our full image data set from those 5 cameras, and we did a manual review. So everybody jumped in and reviewed pictures, and we tried to find all the snakes we could find. So we're assuming that humans are pretty good at this and that we're finding most, if not all, snakes. Once we had an idea of what was in the data set, we ran all the images through the change detection algorithm, which flags a subset of images for the review. And then those flagged images went through a second manual review, were reviewed by people, and we made sure that people who had not looked at those images before looked at the new images. So it was a blind and independent review. Like the person before couldn't remember whether there'd been a snake there or not, even though that's unrealistic with millions of images, but we wanted to be extra careful. And then we were able to compare those data sets and see how well our algorithm did. So first of all, good news, at the reintroduction site, we did actually get some images of Louisiana pinesnakes. And so you can see a couple images here, what those might look like. We did pretty well when you're comparing the tag reader to the total camera. So to orient you here, the cameras are along the bottom, the 5 cameras and paired tag readers, and then we're looking at the number of Louisiana pinesnake observations on the y-axis. And so you can see for cameras 11 and 12 on the far right, we had the same number of detections on the tag reader and the total camera. On camera 9 in the middle, we had 1 extra detection by the tag reader that the camera missed. In camera 4 on the far left, we had an observation by the camera that the tag reader missed. And then camera 7 there, the tag reader had a whole lot more observations, but our camera was malfunctioning during part of that time. So the 2 observations that the camera found were 2 observations that the tag reader found. So while the camera was working, it found just as many observations as the tag reader. So pretty good success. However, you can see in that light gray bar, our algorithm for the most part wasn't quite as good at flagging those snake images. However, one thing our algorithm was really good at was reducing the number of images to review. So we typically roughly estimate about an hour to review about 10,000 images. And so you can see that adds up over time when you're looking at hundreds or millions of images. And so our algorithm was able to reduce the total number of images reviewed between like 40 and 90% and averaging probably around the high 70s, which saves a whole bunch of time. However, if we're missing pine snakes, it's not great. So we wanted to make sure we optimize it and work better in our next iteration. And so we found that humans were pretty consistent across the sites. We got 10 out of 11 individuals detected. So the tag readers and the cameras detected 10 of the same individuals, and then the camera detected 1 unique individual, which is the individual shown here. And basically it went up to the fence and went left and didn't end up crossing the tag reader. So the camera caught it, but the tag reader missed it. And then we also had an image where the tag reader detected a snake, this image here, but the humans missed it. And believe it or not, there is a snake in that picture, and his little tail is right there. So you can see how it would be easy to miss the snake in this picture. But we found that similar to box traps, our camera traps work just as well as the tag readers for us. So that leads us to the current project I'm talking about today. And so here we want to continue monitoring in Texas using our camera traps. And so we had 4 objectives. A lot of them were conditional on us actually finding pine snakes though. So we wanted to add to our long-term trapping data set. We wanted to reevaluate, determine the status of the Louisiana Pinesnake in Texas to determine if they've been extirpated. We are trying to quantify detection of other snake species to see if those can be used to help predict Louisiana Pinesnake presence. And then assuming we can detect and collect pine snakes, we want to collect fecal and tissue samples from any captured snakes. So we deployed 25 cameras, Reconyx Hyperfire 2, and these were in the center of the plus-shaped drift fence, very similar to all our previous setups. And like before, we took images every 30 seconds. And then these were slightly fancier cameras, so we were able to set them to take pictures starting 30 minutes before sunrise to 30 minutes after sunset. Our memory cards and batteries were changed every 3 to 4 weeks. And then these cameras ran March through October in both 2021 and 2022. We did a modification to our camera trap setup, and hopefully you can see here at the base of the camera trap, we actually put like a 3 by 3 foot wide piece of carpet, and we tried to get kind of a neutral background color carpet, but we found there's a lot of variation in the background images that make running the algorithm really complicated. So we wanted to simplify the background as best we could. So that was our first attempt at it. So reviewing all the images from these cameras, we had 25 total sites. 4 of the sites were deliberately set really close to last known locations of Louisiana pinesnakes. So 3 were close to historical roadkill locations, and 1 camera replaced the trap at the last trap caught snake location in 2012. And all of these images for those 4 sites were reviewed manually. We wanted to do our best to make sure there were no Louisiana pine snakes. So what does manual review look like? And I got a little crazy and put a little video in, and it looks like it's actually running this time, so that's a win. So you can see there's not a lot of variation in the background of these photos. It's kind of flipping through photo by photo, and you can speed up or slow down the video. We use Reconix Map View for this. And there's our snake popped up in the upper left, and he's hanging out there for, it looks like 1, 2, 3 consecutive pictures. And at that point, we pause and go back and kind of gather any information we need from those pictures, date and time, number of images the snake was in, any additional information we want to gather. So basically, we were watching videos, lots and lots of videos of grass growing with the occasional snake detection. For the other 21 sites, some of which were previous trap sites, some were new sites, we ran the change detection algorithm first to reduce the number of images reviewed. And then we went through how we did with the other images and reviewed the reduced images manually. And so I mentioned we'd talk a little bit more in depth about the algorithm. So here's hopefully not too many details. But hey, you found a snake. Will the algorithm find it too? And so here you can see 2 separate snake observations, one in the top row, one in the bottom row, where the snake is only in the image is only in one image basically. So 30 seconds before it's not there, 30 seconds after it's not there. So we see a little snake here and a bigger snake here. So to run our images through our algorithm, you can see here some variation. So no snake, snake. You can also see there's some variation in the lighting, some movement in the vegetation. So these are all background things we have to worry about when we're evaluating these pictures by our algorithm. In this image, you can see really the only change here appears generally to be that snake. So that's kind of the ideal candidate for using our change detection algorithm. So our first step is to flatten our images and turn them all gray. So instead of working with 3 to 4 color bands, now we're only working with 1 color band. So we have a much smaller amount of data for each image. And then it's a change detection. So we are going to subtract our first image from our second image, and we're going to do that pixel by pixel. So basically, we're just doing some raster math. And that leaves us with a change image there on the far right. And what we do is we take the absolute value of the change. So whether the pixel gets much darker or much lighter, we just want to know the magnitude of the change. So then we know what is changed in grayscale still, where 0 is the brightest white, so the biggest change, and 1 is the darkest black. And then we set up beforehand, we test pictures with known snakes and determine a brightness scale. So if you're looking at the magnitude of change, like 0 to 0.1, 0.1 to 0.2, 0.2 to 0.4, some sort of range where the majority of the pixels where the snake is that are falling into that range, we add those all up. And then, so here you can see, here's our snake there, but we can also see that change in lighting on the vegetation and on the carpet there, versus in this picture, we really just see the snake change. And here you can see how effective really that carpet is at increasing the contrast between the snake and the ground. And you can see when they're covered partially by the fence, that takes away from some of the brightness. And then basically any images where the sum of that pixel change meets the predetermined threshold, we keep those images, they're flagged for review, and what we consider empty images or images that don't meet our threshold are skipped and we move on. So quick and dirty, our change detection algorithm in 5 steps. So we did take the first year and we went through all of our May images. Everybody reviewed May images to look for snakes, and we used the information from that session, that trap session, to modify our algorithm thresholds to improve capturing the snakes images, hopefully. And after that evaluation, we made some modifications. We were able to do some modifications on the camera setup itself, as well as some modifications on the algorithm, cleaning up the brightness range and the thresholds from the first round of images. One of the changes we made to the camera setup was this quad pod, which was used in New Mexico by some coworkers of ours. And it's a really neat setup. Everything comes apart and goes back together. The legs are screwed into the PVC T's at the top, and the camera is attached on a crossbar. And so it's much more stable than what we had been using before, which means our camera is not moving around, which means our change detection algorithm works better. It also lowered the camera a little bit so we could focus in more on that carpet, and it really allows quick and easy setup. It's reusable across sites. It breaks down to lay flat, which is nice. And you can see our coworkers added other data collectors like that automated call recorder in the left-hand picture there. So all told, over the 2 years, we collected 19.5 million images overall. For the 4 cameras that were close to the historical sites, we did our full image review of 3.3-ish million million images. And for our other 21 cameras that we ran through the algorithm first, we went through about 4.3 million images. And with about 7.7, 7.8 million images reviewed, I'm sorry to tell you, we detected no Louisiana Pinesnakes. However, in those images, we did have 467 observations of 18 different snake species. So let me see if I can mess this up really quick. But one of our most common snake species was the coachwhip, Pituophis flagellum. You also sometimes get some really cool behavioral patterns here, like these 2 mating racers. And then we get a few cool snake observations like this coral snake here. Let me see if I messed that up. Cool. And so here's the 18 snake species we found. You don't have to read them all here, but you can tell looking at the total observations that there was a wide variety in the amount of observations we had. So again, our most common was coachwhip and the racer. And then we had a few common things like ribbon snakes, rat snakes, and had a fair amount of hognose and coral snakes. And then we got a few 1, 2, 3 observations of things like the timber rattlesnake or some smaller snakes, which are typically harder to capture on camera traps, like the little brown snakes. So overall, a good representation of the community out there. As you might expect, we had kind of 2 peaks of activity throughout the year. So we had the most snake activity generally April through June, and then another peak in September and October. Remember, we did not run the traps overnight, but typically we were capturing the most amount of snake images mid-morning around 11 a.m. was kind of our peak, but typically a little bit earlier in the day. Let's see. So overall, our objectives, we were able to add to our trapping data set. We added a lot of snake observations. Unfortunately, we had no pine snake observations. So with the no snakes found, there was really no change to the status because ongoing monitoring is needed to establish extirpation based on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regulations. We did have incidental detections of many other snake species, but with no captured Louisiana pine snakes, we had no fecal or other tissues. So just a quick summary, there are advantages and disadvantages to camera traps, just like any other survey method. Advantages are you can have more detections. They are efficient. They are out there running and working when humans cannot be. And if you leave them running long enough, they're cheaper over time. We get the exact dates, times, and some temperature and weather information where the snake was quote unquote captured on images. As you all know, in Texas, it's like 95% private land, and we at NRI actually work a lot on military installations as well. So camera traps work really nicely for gathering some data on like the snake or other animal communities when you have limited access. We were also running traps during COVID, which a lot of our research was on pause, kind of got shut down, but this was able to keep going and only needed rare checkups from us. Disadvantages, you have nothing in hand. So if you need additional information like genetics, measurements, things like that, then camera trapping is not the best setup for you. Also, the one big issue we're working on is camera traps. They generate millions of images, and that takes a lot of manpower to go through. And so there are ways to get around that and other things we're continuing working on. So kind of our future plans, obviously continued monitoring of Louisiana Pinesnakes. The camera traps work well as one piece of a larger part of the recovery plan. They're not the be all end all, we wouldn't expect them to be, but they can be a very useful tool. We are also continuing work on alternative image review methods. And so we worked recently with Texas State University and did a convolutional neural network. It worked okay for other things. Snakes, it was still hard to identify them. We have a new collaboration in place with a new stats professor here at Texas A&M, and we're working on methods like using AI or computer vision. Just had a meeting with them a month or two ago. Turns out there's a lot of variation in the pictures in time and space that make this still a challenge. The other challenge that we face is there's a large picture imbalance. So we have millions of empty images and hundreds to thousands of snake images, which provides a challenge. If you want to get away from the timed settings, there are other camera trap setups that use more IR settings. And so this adrift camera trap setup is an example of that. And we actually did a recent test of it at Eglin Air Force Base, another place we're working using camera traps. And so in this setup, you basically have a camera trap that's mounted looking down in the bucket, and the snakes use the drift fences again, directed through the bucket, and the bucket helps focus the background, and you tend to get better return using the infrared settings than you do having a camera just kind of loose and hanging out there. So we paired the IR cameras with our timed settings, and all those daggers mean at least one of our 3 cameras had some issues. So you can tell early in the setup, we had some issues, finally got wrinkles or the issues kind of ironed out. We found overall, as you might expect, our timed cameras still had more snake observations, and they had one more snake species. But if you look at the top, if you look at the top, our timed cameras, we had about 1.4 million images. Our IR cameras, we only had 145 images. So if we use our estimated 10,000 images per hour, basically it's a time saving of about 144 hours on the back end. So to us, that's kind of a no-brainer setup on this case. And so it'll work well if you're looking at communities, but we still hesitate to use just the IR settings for species like the Louisiana Pinesnake, where it might mean a lot if you have one very rare detection. And so we think, you might get closer to the review time if we can actually get some movement on these image review methods on the back end. But so ongoing research, we're never quite done. But with that, I'll take any questions.